Welcome to the Hey Docs podcast with your host, Jill Allen. Today we have special guest Oliver Gellis from OrthoFi joining us on the show. In this episode, we are highlighting how data-driven strategies are reshaping patient financials and practice efficiency. From the transition to auto-pay systems to the strategic application of interest and flexible financing, we're unpacking how these changes not only align with current data, but also significantly enhance patient satisfaction and practice growth. Let's jump in. By now, we all know I talk to a lot of doctors and give advice to practices in every stage of their life cycle. And one question my docs ask all the time is, who do you recommend for marketing to attract more new patients from the internet? My answer? Easy. I have been recommending Mary Kay Miller and her team at Kaleidoscope for the better part of a decade. Why? They are thorough, professional, and transparent. Kaleidoscope Digital Marketing is who you want to talk to because they understand how to market in the orthodontic world and they offer tools that are affordable and easy to use. I'm telling you, if you're looking to step up your digital presence, Kaleidoscope should be your first call. Go to contactkl.com to request your free digital marketing consultation. That's contactkl.com. Oliver, thank you so much for being on Hey Docs with me today. I have been looking forward to this. We've had the opportunity to have OrthoFi and OrthoBank on a couple different times, so I feel like we're saving the best for the last here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jill. It's great to be able to take time and share some ideas, share some data. Love it.
Yeah. So in the event that somebody is listening and they maybe just don't know who you are or what you do within OrthoFi, OrthoBank, would you give us a little history and also tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in the orthodontic industry?
Yes, I am currently the Chief Marketing Officer for OrthoFi, but my origin starts over 25 years ago combined in the dental industry, and 20 of that happily in the ortho specialty. I think of it as a love affair. This has been the best career I could have possibly dreamed up. And what I love is that I had two lives in orthodontics. I fell in love with orthodontics through the clinical channel, leading up the marketing effort for Ormco and really helping to put passive self-ligation and that clinical conversation on the map and getting all kinds of really good satisfaction from the things that we did there and building the Damon Forum and really good meetings and education to help practices in that way. And then towards the end of my career at Ormco, I started to really understand the financials of our practices in a deeper way. And I became invested and I started doing lectures at Ormco meetings regarding how we thought about flexibility and financing and things. And that connected me with Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Kozlowski, who ended up being the co-founders of OrthoFi. So that's how I found myself at OrthoFi. And that's been a whole other journey, right? 10 years of really diving into the financials and data. So I've gotten, I feel like two of the great halves of seeing two of the halves of this industry. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I think that's what I love about you is you really are able to look at and assess both sides. You've got that clinical dimension to you and then now all of the data. And I think that kind of leads me into what you did not say is that you have also co-authored a best-selling book, Level the Curve. And what I have really appreciated about that book, and I really want you to dive into a little bit with us, is the insight into data that you have and that you guys are continuing to gather on the OrthoFi side that I think really has set the new tone and track for where patient financials are at now and are going in practices. So would you mind just talking to us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the decision to write the book with Dr. Reynolds, Jamie, my good friend, at first it was just a realization that we had already written a lot of blogs and articles and things that have been published in a variety of different media. And it was a little bit of the, hey, we've written so much. Do we think that we can pull this all together into a book? And so at first it was like, let's just conglomerate all this. But as I thought about it, it really became more of a give back initiative for me to give back to an industry and to a group of customers that have enriched my life so much. So that's what I'm happiest about, is that I've had people unsolicited come to me in the hallways at a meeting and just say, hey, I read your book and it really has helped me. And that's what it was all about for me.
Yeah,
But
that's great. And I
Oh,
oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
So to your thing about the data, I think that's the edge that we wanted to bring. There's a lot of great insights and education. Jill, you yourself, you share so many great insights to the industry. I think
Thank you.
where I thought that I could bring something a little different was, of course, being that I was with OrthoFi, I had access to all this information and data
Mm-hmm.
from what is now over 600 practices. And so I have a unique advantage and purchase point to be able to help people understand, especially since we as an industry don't have Dun and Bradstreet reports or market share reports, or
Right.
we don't have this
Yes.
stuff. And the average practitioner and the average practice owner is trying to run a $2 million business with almost no market data. And so I
Mm-hmm.
thought that I could help shine a light on some things to clarify some things for doctors out there.
Yeah. And I so appreciate that. And for you and I both being in the industry for a while, one of the things that I wanted to do was really take a walk down memory lane for a minute here. As you've been in this industry over 25 years, I've been in over a little over 32 now. And as I look back, one of the things that I have really appreciated, but I find so interesting, is just I'm gonna talk just a little bit about how we are collecting money
Mhm.
and how flexible financing is making such an impact on the way our practices are growing and the way patients are able to accept care. And again, I'm gonna walk us way back in time. I got into this again quite a long time ago, and I can remember when, and I'm sure you remember this too, when the train of thought, especially from a lot of consultants, that was out there for all the practices was we accept at least a 30% down at minimum. We make sure that we are taking our payments no longer than 3 months less, the shortest amount of time that we're going to be in treatment. And we, at that point, we weren't even on auto pays. We weren't even, it was like patients come in every 4 weeks and they get a little coupon booklet and they bring their money in. And we live by the 4 week marker for kind of our cash flow. And one of the things that I have just really loved as I have seen this evolution and what we're doing, and I really believe that OrthoFi really pioneered this for our industry, but also gave us the data to be able to show what flexible financing can do for our practices. And I'm going to unpack this even farther in a little bit here, but can you just talk to that a little bit and that data? Just first, the first set of just what we are seeing in case acceptance. And because you've got the insight into over 600 practices and you're seeing all of this data, what that is doing for our industry.
Yeah, you think about it just quickly in that evolution, there's so many things that touch, so many dots that connect to that, like the why it has evolved this way. First of all, back to the whole like clinical understanding is we used to have them in once a month conveniently because not only did we want them to make a payment with the coupon book, but their elastics were likely fatigued and we needed to re-tighten the braces. And so it all worked out, right? And then all of a sudden we're using aligners or we're using passive self-ligation where they can stretch appointments out and make themselves more efficient by seeing patients every 8 to 10 weeks. If I see everyone 8 to 10 weeks, but the expectation is they're going to pay when they come in, like all of a sudden my cash flow is off. So some
Yep.
of these things like were the mother of invention of the next thing. Then paired with that consumer behavior, people falling in love with credit card points and putting everything on their credit cards, which is the whole thing. And then now buying behaviors in terms of like how people want to pay for things. So natural evolution. You layer on top of that the fact that we're treating in a lot less time and the whole
Mm-hmm.
mantra of having to get your treatment, your time and your payment time to match is no longer feasible. At a time when the
Mm-hmm.
economy is tighter and people need more affordability, you cannot compress a larger, higher fee into a shorter time. So that's not a reality that we're able to live. So we have to have some level of flexibility. So the innovation I think that we were able to bring by looking at data is okay, so we got to be more flexible, but there's lots of ways to be flexible. Anyone today on this call can go home, they can lower their minimum down, and they can allow themselves to take more months in payment. You can do that today, and you can put that on a static sheet and slide it across the table, and you will probably see more starts. You will probably see a little bit more growth than you would if you didn't do that. But everyone on this call knows that if you did that, you would see your cash flow erode. You would see a hit to your cash flow, and you might see an uptick in the risk. So what we set about with OrthoFi, by analyzing the data and then trying to build systems and understandings and philosophies to help maximize this, is how do we maximize the growth potential of flexibility while still balancing cash flow and risk? And so what we saw is most of the answer to this is using what we call open choice. So giving patients the ability to choose among a wider set of options allows you to get the benefit of having some more flexible options, but also allowing patients to pay you more and higher downs that you would never suspect, that create a balance of leverage and cash flow. And then also the risk mitigation of that comes down. So just by instituting that concept and that philosophy and then measuring it and seeing the progress, we were able to validate that you actually can balance those three key levers.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love about that is we just didn't have the data up until recently to really, it has to take some time to play out. And we all had our gut feelings about what that would look like. And again, we really went against the grain in the beginning, against previous era of how we did financing and practices.
That's right.
And now to look at that, and I know with a lot of my startups and a lot of our younger practices, it was almost like we were penalizing doctors for becoming more efficient, but then penalizing the patients for not being able to pay for their efficiency. And
That's
then in
right.
turn, they wouldn't get that start. So I really appreciate that you guys have really been able to bring that to light. And that kind of leads me into what I think is almost the next generation of, okay, we got it sorted out. We now know that patients want to be able to use their credit cards. Patients want to be able to have a flexible financing. I always say, ideally, we don't want to let finances get in the way of the patient saying yes to treatment, just like we don't want to get in the way of the modality of treatment that they want to use. Something new coming into our future. And again, we're going to go back down memory lane. There, we touched on doing interest with payments, but for a long time it was no, oh my gosh, we can't do it, we can't manage it, we're going to leave that to third party companies to only do that for us. And I want to peek behind the curtain, because I think this is the future of giving our patients another choice, another opportunity. And us as practitioners and office managers being able to feel safe that we can manage, possibly allowing patients to go even longer with adding some interest, and we aren't just putting ourselves out there, maybe all of our skin is in it. Do you mind talking to that a little bit?
Yeah. And what I love about this is I really have a lot of appreciation for the practices that trusted us in the early times before we had all the data, to your point that now we have 10 plus years of data. So this is no longer theory. This is now close to fact. So I feel pretty confident in the way that I'm talking about this today. First of all, just for everyone's sake, we still offer majority of options zero interest. So this is not, you're either going to be non-interest as a practice or you're going to be interest as a practice. The idea is to create carrot and stick incentives in this open choice model, where if a patient needs to go longer, that there is a disincentive for them to do that. So they will only do it if they need to. Meaning there will be a little bit of interest, and it will, like, the further out they go, the more interest that they will see. So it's intended to encourage them to pick a shorter plan. But we see that the patients that need it do pick it. It's about 10% of the patients. So it's not a dominant portion. Mm-hmm. It's not I'm going to share some data to show that it does not negatively affect case acceptance or conversion rate. In fact, it's almost the opposite. I'm going to get to that. It's not intuitive, but I'll get to that. But And the idea is not to layer on a punitive amount of interest. It's far less than they would have in their own credit card. It's just a guide rail. It really has two purposes. It is a disincentive to get people to only pick it if they need it, like I said. But then the second thing is we use the data on payment performance to actually calculate the incremental risk of that particular choice. And because we split that with practices, we calculate how much incremental risk they are taking by allowing that patient to choose that. And we are using that little bit of interest to offset that incremental risk so that the net collection rate ends up being what you would expect or better, even though you are technically accepting a little bit riskier plans. And so that's what we see in our actual collection rate, is that it is the same or better than what we see in the industry, partly because we are offsetting the incremental risk that we're introducing.
Yeah, and I love that. And again, it's just one more tool that now we have the data to support, to say, hey, if this is something, and what you said, if there's 10% out there that accept that, that's 10% that we could be missing because we just weren't able to, and really I think until very recently, be able to fit this in, because this hasn't been the norm. Just taking credit card payments wasn't the norm 20 years ago. It's very rare now that we ever get cash in a practice anymore, or we have somebody actually physically walking in and giving us a check anymore. It's almost like now it's, shoot, what do we do with this? I don't know what to do with this here.
That's right.
So
I think what's interesting in the data is that I think what's super interesting about it is yes, we as a fleet can say confidently what this does for practices. I think what we commonly do is, just to make sure that we're walking the talk, is we go back and we do analyses. Practices that use OrthoFi don't have to use interest. They can override it. And we looked at all of our practices and we looked at the ones that overrode interest, meaning eliminated interest from their options almost exclusively, right? So the top group that overrode the most. And then we looked at and compared it with the group that was not overriding at all and letting the system ride. And it's the second time we've done this, so we just updated it last year. But what's super interesting is that there are some intuitive things that we saw, and then there's some counterintuitive things that we saw, right? And so from an intuitive standpoint, you would assume that the collection rate, the overall collection rate, would be better if they leveraged interest, which it is, about 0.5% to a whole percentage point better collections. What was super interesting, though, is that cash flow was far better for the group that was using interest, or at least having it as an option. And the reason why that is because, again, when a patient has the open choice and they're using, in our case, the slider, and they're looking at options, the actual consumer behavior that is very typical is that they will try to avoid interest. They'll find the longest amount of plans and months that they can pay without interest. And then they will ask themselves, is that low enough? Is that the lowest that I need? Is that the monthly that I need? And if it's a little higher than what they need, they will sometimes keep going into the interest area. But what will often happen is that they will then go back to their down payment, and they will move the down payment up a little bit to a comfortable level, but still to where the monthly comes down. And that is the compelling behavior that we see. And that's the positive leverage that this open choice model affords. So we actually saw $500 average same day cash higher in the group that was actively using the system as designed. The last part, which was the most counterintuitive to most people on this call, is that the conversion rate was actually higher for the group that was using interest. That does not mean that consumers prefer to pay interest versus not interest. What it means is practices intuitively know that if they turn off interest, there is now no disincentive for a patient to pick the longest possible plan. So they either shorten the plan months available because they want to avoid that, or they control the slider where they are not really allowing the patient to openly choose. They are suggesting the options, which we're back to the old way, and it like neuters the magic of the open choice, which is that consumer behavior that the millennial wants of having that power to choose. So that was super interesting analysis that validated what we're doing.
Yeah. And you know what? And what I also really like about this is, again, I'm going to just take us back down memory lane, coming back to present again, is for so long we would go to third party finance companies to give patients this option. And what we're able to do now, which I think in all areas of our practice, we're trying to make this as easy as possible for patients to interact without having to get out and make multiple decisions with multiple companies. And I just really believe that this is just one more really great tool in our toolbox to not have to give them another reason to get wrapped around the axle around another company, when now they can just choose what works, what's going to work for them without having to interact with a third party company.
That's right. That's right.
Hey docs, let's talk about Smile Suite, because it's not just another scheduling system. It's a game changer in the world of new patient management. And as a proud Smile Suite partner, I've witnessed the incredible impact it has on practices of all sizes. Smile Suite means your new patient calls and web leads are expertly handled 7 days a week, even during nights and weekends. And they offer top-notch customizable presentation software and seamless post-consultation follow-up. It's like having a secret weapon for your practice's success. Curious? Dive into the revolution at getsmilesuite.com. And don't forget to mention Hey Docs to unlock some extra goodies. Elevate your practice with Smile Suite, because every smile deserves a suite of excellence. Hey docs, let's talk about consumer experience for a minute, specifically the kind of experience where you purchase an item or a service that you've been excited about, only to be let down or disappointed by the actual product or experience. Not a good way to start a relationship. That's why relationships are so highly valued at GC Orthodontics, because they are truly dedicated to the orthodontic specialty. GC Orthodontics is a leading provider of TOMI orthodontic appliances, quality products that have serviced the orthodontic community for well over 50 years. They are focused on providing total solutions that include both digital and analog orthodontic treatment modalities, like brackets, indirect bonding, and clear aligners. It's time to build a long-term relationship with a company that is dedicated to delivering total solutions to your practice. Visit GC Orthodontics at www.gcamerica.com/Jill Allen and see why countless leading clinics have made the switch. So I want to talk a little bit, because I've got a lot of startup docs on. And I know some of them are going, oh, Jill, this is not what you told us. Like, we're not going to, I know that you talk pretty heavily about we have to have some safety nets in place in a startup practice versus what we may have in an existing practice. And I know that Oliver, you and I have talked about this in length at different times. And for some of my listeners or people who may or may not have listened to me, who may not have worked with me, one of the things that I'm always encouraging my startup docs is, even though we need flexible financing, which I agree with 100%, there isn't a thing that Oliver hasn't said that I don't agree with. I do think that there are different stages in a practice where we can turn these levers on more, and where we maybe need to keep some governors on a little bit. And probably one of the things that I'm always talking to my startup docs about is that if we are looking at going from zero to, what maybe our 400,000 in our first year production goals, we have to be managing our cash flow, because we have no AR. We have no existing money coming in. And I'm always saying we have to be careful that we aren't setting it so we are taking no money down and we're taking our payments out over 64 months or something crazy like that, because you do have to get a foundation under you. And I'm wondering if you can just talk to us a little bit about how you guys might approach that. Because I always say, if it's an existing practice, if we're a $1 million+ practice, these things don't matter as much as they do if you're going from, I've got zero in AR, trying to just build up to 150, build up to my 200, my 300 or whatnot. So I'm wondering if you can talk to that and how you guys help, especially younger practices, still stay safe within some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, great question. So that's the first thing I'll say is that's really helpful. In general, philosophically, everything I said earlier about open choice delivering balance is true. The reason why I think what you
Mm-hmm.
say is accurate about a startup practice is the more time you let it go, the more healthy the cash flow is going to be because you're going to have all these different dots on the plot chart map that are going to blend to something great. So once they get to a certain size where they're doing 15 starts a month, 20 starts a month plus, there are enough dots that even if they have somebody pick a low down, they're going to have somebody pick a high down, and it's going to
Yep.
balance out enough to where on a month-to-month basis, we see very little variability in same-day cash. I think where a startup is unique, where I think you have the right idea, is that in a startup, when they're doing maybe 3 to 4 starts a month as they get going, every one choice is much more weighted. So if 2 out of the 3 picked a very low down, that is a very big variance in cash flow versus like they're going to have a good month where they luck out and they have 3 pay-in-fulls, but that kind of inconsistent variability is hard for a startup practice to weather. So there are things that we can do with the configuration. We can set up more conservative minimum downs and things to start out with. What we love to do is have a goal where once we get up to a certain volume, we change the configuration. So we're all working towards the
Yes.
same goal because
Mm-hmm.
it is a little bit of a disadvantage, right? If you're neutering the growth benefit, we want to try to minimize the amount of time you live in the gully of minimizing the growth benefit. So if we're all in the same plan, that's great. But there are other things we can do. We can slightly change the incentive for pay in full. Like we can make that a little bit more. We
Mm-hmm.
typically add incentives for 50, 75% and pay in full at differing discount levels. For some startup practices, we sometimes recommend or encourage adding a 25% alternative, right? Where it's little bit less percent
Mm-hmm.
discount, but even more carrot and stick. So there are things that we can do to gently nudge the consumer and also protect the floor, always in that plan of how do we get to where we want to get to, where we have growth. And it is a little bit of leap of faith. There are some doctors that they want to trust their ability to grow. We just had a doctor this week go live. He started 4 patients in the first week, and he's thrilled, but there's lots of ways that we can work with practices that are starting up.
Yeah. And I think that's what I really appreciate is that, and appreciate about your team is that you guys will, it isn't just everybody fits one scenario. We really have to, and you guys do a good job at really meeting the docs where they're at, and setting, just being aware that a startup doc may not have the same parameters in the first 6 months, first 8 months, first year, that maybe a practice that's been trucking along for 10 years and $3 million practice or whatnot. So when it comes down to OrthoFi and the research in regard to choice and treatment payment options, I want you to talk a little bit about the data in what you guys are seeing with our start outcomes, and especially because I think this has been a big thing, the difference in what we're seeing with adult starts versus maybe I'll call them our bread and butter, our
Yeah.
bread and butter starts, our kids.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I'm talking a lot about because we need to shine a light on this, mainly
Mm-hmm.
because I do believe some of the impact that we're seeing in the last 18 to 24 months is market related. There is certainly an economy or the consumer perception of an economy with inflation, all this stuff that is creating a different dynamic with adult patients. For everyone out there, adult patients are a very different consumer. They need to be treated and courted and persuaded and persuaded very differently. So if you have the same playbook for everybody, please go and think through that. But they're different mainly because their decision to start treatment was whimsical. They likely had the idea a week or two ago. They were inspired to do it. It's not like they didn't know they had a malocclusion, but they were inspired to actually do something about it a little time ago. So they've not been saving, they've not been planning. So the whole idea of like how much they have to pay down is very different. And there's even an article that just came out in
Mhm.
MSNBC just this week saying the average American has less than $500 to put towards an unplanned expense. I would tell you that, unlike for kids, this qualifies a lot of times as an unplanned expense. So
Yeah.
I'm giving you all that to wind back up to what the data is actually showing. And that is that last year we had starts down. If you look at Gauge, 3.5%. If you look at OrthoFi, about 1.5%, but a little down. And we're not used to that as an industry. We've been steady Eddie 3 to 4% a year or higher, which is great. So it's a little new for us to have to deal with these things. But back to your thing, if you look at child starts, they were flatter up. If you look at adult exams, which I think is a window into actual consumer demand, right? Those were down about 4%. Similarly, adult fixed appliance starts were down 4%. 4% fewer calls into the practice to make an appointment, 4% fewer fixed appliance. That tracks, so that's okay. The
Mhm.
outlying part was that adult aligner starts were down by 11%. And so in my opinion, there's only one reason for that. And that is that the one outlying thing that we do with our aligner starts is that we require people to pay the lab bill up front, or at least in many practices. We
Many
try to keep
times.
our
Yeah.
ortho
Yeah.
practices, our practices, not to do that. Some of them have adopted that. We can't be there every time, but it is the fact that we are requiring patients to put down 13, 15 or more $100 to get started. After what I just told you about the consumer and the affordability, we're practicing some amount of self-inflicted sales prevention. Now, back to what you were saying, Jill, about like the startup practice, they have less wiggle room to be able to dive into what I'm saying philosophically. And so, what I'm super happy about is not only do I feel good that we have a system that can help counter some of that stuff, but we're
Mhm.
also trying to partner with companies, in this case, Invisalign. And so we're really excited about a program that is not quite launched yet, but I want everyone to look out for it. And that is what's called FPT10. So for OrthoFi practices exclusively, our customers are going to be able to split their lab bill across 10 months, starting 30 days after they accept the case. So if you go back to a startup practice that is likely working on 60-day net terms, in 60 days after they go, they're going to have to pay their whole lab bill. Naturally, that's going to affect
Mhm.
how they present fees and how they present minimum downs. But once you have
Yep.
this program, there really is no reason to do that anymore. And all of a sudden now the advantage comes right back into your court and you can play offense again. And so
Love it.
that's the best way that we can counter this, because there's no
Mhm.
question that that 7% delta of demand and actual conversion rate, it accounted for 2 points out of the 3.5 point drop last year. And that was self-inflicted.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So
I am excited. I know you gave me a little, I got a little sneak peek at knowing that is coming. And I'm in a complete agreement with you. I think that is going to be just one more step in the right direction for us startups and existing practices to be able to manage. And I know right now it's just going to be with Invisalign, just thinking about how are we managing the technology that we want to be able to deliver, the treatment modalities that you as doctors want to be able to deliver, but not be hamstrung by the lab fees that come along with that, and put yourself in a position where you're having to make this decision. Maybe I just deliver basic metal braces because I really want to do this other thing, because I may not have the cash flow, especially if I'm a younger doc or younger startup practice going forward. So I love that. And I can think in my mind of different ways. Could we incentivize them if they have to, if you are a startup and I don't want to get down a rabbit here hole. Could they pay a little extra interest on that where the practice takes, I don't know. I think there's just so many ways that we can think about how do we use this so it ultimately is a win for everybody, because we do want, I hate to see those starts walk out the door because we weren't able to meet the needs. If they gave up their time to get all the way into the practice, we should be able to find a solution for them to say yes.
And I know it sounds trite. There's a deeper financial reason for what I'm saying that we don't have time for today, but just remember that it's always better to get the start than to not get the start. And the reason why I say that, and it sounds silly to say, but for practices that have a set fixed expense line, whenever you grow, those extra cases that you can reach out and get by having some different policies or different campaigns or different things, anything you can do to add to what your prior total was, all of those cases are actually more profitable than the cases that you currently are treating are. And that's because 70% of a practice's costs typically are fixed expense. So when you go out and maybe get a little bit more aggressive with the minimum down with Invisalign, you're able to get more starts. All those extra starts did not require more rent, more utilities, more water, more team, more any of the fixed expenses. They just ask for the additional material costs. So those actually come in at a 70 to 80% variable margin, which then makes your whole business more profitable. That kind of goes back into that transactional thinking of I need to get what I need to get to make this particular case profitable versus expanding the way you think about your business, which is in the book. And we talk about this transactional versus aggregate thinking is thinking about your business as a blend of different transactions that are healthy. And as long as your blend is healthy, you should keep playing offense. So that's in the end why I always say these are such profitable business models. Everyone out there is just a lucky son of a gun that you have this profitable business model. So lean into it and leverage it and do everything you can to drive growth, because it will actually make you more profitable by doing that.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. So, as we are starting to wrap up here, I'm just wondering if I know you've given us a lot of data so far, but any other data tidbits or interesting pieces of advice that you think that listeners need to know as they're heading into this next year?
Yeah, so one thing that I stumbled upon that I think was pretty interesting, and I would love everyone to go back and ask all the right questions and look at their numbers, is I think that with the economy, with coming off of stimulus, I think everyone intuitively understood that there were some patients that came into our practices and started with us that probably wouldn't have otherwise financially, right? That had stimulus and nowhere to spend, and they committed this thing. So I think everyone is waiting for the other shoe to drop in terms of their AR performance. And there certainly has been a little bit of a change, a little bit of an erosion, not as much as everyone feared. So it wasn't quite the doomsday thing. But we've been monitoring it very closely to make sure that it doesn't go there. And so in that monitoring, there's one thing that I really came upon, and that is that what we are seeing both in our numbers and Gage's national average stuff is that there is a lot of past due AR that is sitting in the wrong bucket. There is a lot of past due insurance AR that is not really insurance AR. The claim is stopped paying, the patient changed jobs or whatever. And because in a lot of practices, there's one person managing it and it's just AR, so it doesn't matter what bucket it's in, they don't necessarily take the time and effort to transfer it to the patient ledger and therefore reach out. So many bad things can happen from doing that. You may not even try to reach out, right? You may actually forget about it, let it go, and then all of a sudden you've got uncollectible funds. But then also even from an accurate understanding and reporting of how you are performing, if it's really patient AR, you should know that it's really patient AR and not insurance AR. And so when you look at the Gage average, like the total AR is about 5.8, 5.9% of total AR is delinquent. And the split is actually fairly even, right? We're seeing about 2.4% sitting in patient and about 3.5 sitting in, or the opposite, 2.4, 2.5 sitting in insurance, and 3.4, 3.5 sitting in patient. And we at OrthoFi, we can't not allocate it correctly because we have different teams that go after these amounts. So as soon as we know that this is no longer insurance AR, that it has to be moved over to the patient ledger, we have to do it because it won't be worked if it won't do that. So
Sure.
you won't see that there, which is why you see a much bigger difference with OrthoFi. It's about 0.6% past due on insurance, and we see about 3.3% on patient, right? So similar. So in the end, it's about 3.9 versus 5.9. But my point is, if, what I did analysis on is to figure out what percentage would have stayed in the insurance bucket had we not moved it. And it was a whole 1.5% of total AR. It's
Wow.
a big number. So if you look at that and you go back to, if you're not an OrthoFi customer and you look at, if you're on Gauge or you're looking at it, if you see anything like the average, if you see 2.5% insurance and 3.4-ish% patient, you probably are looking at a reality where it's actually more like 1% insurance and more like 5% patient. I think if anyone looked at their Gauge numbers and saw that, I think they would feel differently and they would act
Mm-hmm.
very differently. So
Yeah.
I think overall, I don't think consumer behavior is changing all that much, but I see what's happening is it's getting noisy because we're not doing the right allocation. So we're not telling ourselves the right story, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And that's something I advocate all the time for with my clients is we have got to keep clean books, clean ledgers. We have to be paying attention to our reports. We have to be working everything. And I love this point because I don't think we talk about it enough. We need to be moving money when into the right bucket so that then we either know that it's uncollectible money that needs to be written off or it's collectible. And we need to get on that with the patient sooner than later. Because when 2 years down the road, when you figure that out and now you think you're going to go back and ask that patient to pay that, you're probably going to get a bad review and good luck getting that money. So we just need to be on top of that. So what a great piece of advice. And I agree with you. I would challenge doctors to go out and just really make sure they know where their money is and make sure that their teams are working them appropriately. So this has been, I know you and I could talk and talk, and it's amazing how quickly time goes. But if somebody wants to get a hold of you, maybe they want to learn out more, you pointed out some really great points and they're like, wow, maybe this is my year. I think I don't want to deal with this in my practice anymore. And I want OrthoFi's help. What's the best way that they can reach out?
Yeah, first of all, I love to hear from individual practices. So I am totally open. If you ever want to email me personally with any questions or insights, you can email me at oliver.geles, Geles, at orthofi.com. If you want a copy of the book, it is on Amazon. You can go and put in Level the Curve and you can purchase it on Amazon. Of course, I'd love to hear feedback if you do. But if you're interested in the OrthoFi solution, the best place to start is startmoresmiles.com. We also have tons of education material, including a really great webinar we're having with you, Jill, on the 25th of this
Thank
month.
you.
It's about education. We love to give back with good insights and education. If nothing else, it's a good resource for you, but you can go to startmoresmiles.com for that.
Yeah, that's great. Oliver, as I like to finish up my Hey Docs episodes with the speed round. So are you ready to accept the speed round challenge?
Challenge accepted.
I knew you would be. All right. Describe your style in one word.
Oh, snarky.
I love that. What are you listening to or watching?
Ooh, I just put together a playlist. I went
Ooh.
old school. I still love the whole like making mixtapes,
Mm-hmm.
but now I'm into making playlists. And the best track I just put on was a track called "Woman" by Mumford and Sons.
Ah, I love Mumford and Sons. That's my goal is to go see them in concert just one time. All right. What do you do just for you?
I have gotten into yoga in a big way, partially because I had a 2-year bout with sciatica, but it's not only settling my body, it's a good way for me to zero out my mind. So I love
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, that's great. Any hidden talents you want to share with us?
Yeesh. I have a crazy addiction to movie quotes. So many people know that I actually speak in movie quotes. And I was born in Italy. So I actually speak a few different languages. I speak 4 languages. I can bore people in a lot of different ways.
Or make them laugh in a lot of different languages. And then the last one, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal?
I would like to see us lick this whole fear of direct to consumer. I think even things like limited treatment, I think that we can change our trajectory and
Mm,
protect ourselves from any future threat. I know we're all happy about Smile Direct Club going under, but trust me, there will be another.
yeah.
And we have this time to get our act together. And so that the next time we have somebody come in and try to take our stuff, we can be a lot more ready for it. That's my audacious goal for myself and everyone on this call.
Yeah. You know, that I love that and completely agree with you. If anything, it showed us that there is a market out there. We just have to be able to find a way to conquer that. Again, thank you so much for being on Hey Docs. It's always a pleasure. I know you and I always have great discussions, but I'm glad that the listeners got to be a fly on the wall with this one. Great information. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
All right. Till next time.